Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Carl's Roller Coaster Podcast. Hello, dear friends. How are you doing? Hope this finds you all well and healthy, alive and kicking. Yeah, there's a lot going on in the world nowadays, and one of the main things is that the semblance of normality coming back, and that's very good, isn't it? Very, very good. For those of us that are accustomed to traveling and popping at different places constantly, week after week, it is definitely something that we've been looking forward to it so much. I hope wherever you are in the world, the situation is improving as well, and you, your family, your loved ones, your neighbors, your community, that you are all safe and sound. Today I bring to you a very, very, very special conversation. This was a very good one, and I decided, because of the length of it and somewhat the way that the conversation kind of like developed, to split in two parts. So I'm bringing to you André Dellamanha. He's an old friend of mine. We've known each other for God knows how long, for many, many years. André is one of these characters that, he just basically smashed in life. He went for his dreams. He really dig deep. He did have quite some support from family, as we all do in one way or another, and throughout his experiences and throughout all of the years that he was engaging in music in one way or another, as a music fan, as a translator, as a traveler just traveling to go and see concerts, he actually went the extra mile. He did forged good relationships with the people that he met along the way, and those really, really paid off. Led him into a professional career that he might have not considered in the very beginning on his teens. But as you will hear on the conversation, and I generally didn't have to even talk that much, because André is so full of energy. He's got so many stories and so much experience. So this first part of the podcast will be basically André telling us his life, his journey. How did he evolve from being a music fan and then eventually becoming a tour manager of the stars? So I hope you guys will dig this conversation, this podcast, and the second part of it will be more a per se music business oriented one, because we will then be hearing from him and I will be questioning him things that I myself endure while on the road with my artists, with the people that I work with, and I'm very curious, so I just asked him several different things, in regards of how things operate on the road, how does it deal with pre-production, and all sorts. And André, having traveled the world countless times, and being the tour manager for the likes of Arch Enemy, Sepultura, Scorpions, Angra, so on and so forth, it's just unmissable. I totally think that his life story, the way that it has developed, the way that he found his way into the business, it is a story to be told, because professionals within the music business industry and musicians themselves, we all know that it's very, very difficult, and it's a very different sort of career to pursue. And honestly, there's no way of putting together a great CV and applying as people normally do for standard jobs. So, enough of me. I hope you guys will enjoy. This is part 1 with André Dellamanha. Hey, André, how are you, my friend? You well?
How's it going? Just getting ready for the day, having a warm coffee after a breakfast burrito here in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Oh my goodness, you are 8 hours behind me, right?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, we're just getting started with the day here. It's a very sunny Saturday, super windy here in the desert. We're in between like fall and summer, but like surprisingly enough, today's not. It's a cool day. The weather is pretty cool.
What is it? What is it cold for you guys there?
No, in a sense of like last week we're like in the 90s, and now I think it's like we're in the 60s today. I mean, it's still early, but it's super windy, like to the point where like my backyard furniture gets flown away all across the backyard, and yeah.
Talking about fun. I understand about living in a windy place. The wind never stops here in London. You know, it's always windy, regardless of the temperature. It's all the feel of the temperature is always way below that what the thermometers are showing. You know, it's pretty intense.
Yeah, I love the weather there, though, man. I love I miss what I miss about Europe is like being able to walk around everywhere. Like over here, if you don't have a car, you're screwed. Basically,
that is so true. That's so America, right? If you don't have a car, you can't go to many places.
Yeah.
Well, André, it's great to talk to you, man. I mean, we've known each other. I was just doing the math the other day, and goodness, it's over 20 years now. And well, we've started actually talking to each other late 90s, I believe it was, and that was the time that we were using a still ICQ. One of the very first, for those of you that are listening that are not as old as me, it was kind of like a software that you had on a computer, and there was this very particular noise whenever you received a message of a letter. Yeah, it was great. And then I think a few years later, then we end up meeting in person when we were like traveling to see some concerts in South America. And yeah, I mean, there's so much. It's so much interesting to see how like your career has navigated throughout all of those years. And there's so many things that we're gonna tap into on this conversation. But I would obviously like to start from the very beginning. How was your upbringing in São Paulo? If mine serves me well, that's where you were born. And how was your upbringing? And basically, what was the influence of family and friends in regards of your personal musical taste and eventually evolving into like becoming a huge music fan and a professional in the music business? So how was your upbringing and family and friends influence in music on you?
Yeah, so basically, like, as almost everyone in Sao Paulo, Brazil, like I'm a son of immigrants from Italy and the United States. I have family who left Sicily and Italy, came to the United States, and then after World War I, my great-grandma left California and moved to Brazil. So we're basically Italian, like 100% of the sides, and Italian Americans, first generation. And but then I moved down to Brazil, met the other side of the family, and then anyway, fast forward, I was born. I was born in a more conservative family. My dad was an attorney, and my mom is a psychiatrist. Basically, my mom is a huge music fan to this day, man. To this day, I don't know if you know that. My mom used to be like a huge Beatles fan, huge Elvis fan. My first memory, I was listening to the radio yesterday in the car, and they asked like, what is your first news memory in your life? And I mean, just listening on the radio wasn't a question to me. But then I was thinking, I'm like, man, the first thing I actually remember was when John Lennon died. I vividly remember my mom was going like, oh my God, John Lennon got shot. I'm like, who's John Lennon and what is shot? And I think it was around 5 years old. And then she started showing me about the Beatles and then Elvis. But then Elvis was what triggered everything, man. Elvis still is, every time I visit Graceland, I cry. I love going there. I have over 100 Elvis Presley bootleg LPs. Like,
Wow.
I love everything. I still buy stuff that they put out, and they still put out a lot of stuff. And yeah, so basically Elvis. But then like the thing that
So your mom was sorry to interrupt, but your mom was kind of like, well, one of the very main, if not the main influence on you in terms of music.
Yeah, but absolutely. That's what she actually introduced me to that stuff. She's a music fan to this day. She follows Rod Stewart all over the world. She goes to every single concert and she buys front row tickets. Like to this day. And actually, like a couple of years ago, my sister actually organized so she could take a photo with Rod Stewart. It was pretty fun. We're planning on having a family trip to Australia next year so she can see Rod Stewart in Australia, and that's one of my favorite places in the world. So we're like, why not? Anyway, so like as everyone who was growing up in Sao Paulo in the early '80s, I think the main turning point into heavy rock music was Kiss. Kiss played in Sao Paulo and in Brazil in 1983, and that was like a massive media propaganda, like on both sides. Like Kiss, the most like they were like back in the day with no cable TV. I think Brazil had like only like 5 or 6 TV channels, and they had like the advertisement for the concert of Kiss, and the Creatures of the Night Tour. So basically, the TV ad was basically a video edit of the "I Love It Loud" video. And the propaganda was like, I don't know, like 1 million tons of lights, 2 million tons of sound. Kids, they're going to destroy Brazil. And like, holy cow. And then the conservative media was like, oh, but they're going to kill chicken on stage. They're like Satanists, And I'm like, oh, that just made everybody like it even more. So Kiss was basically like the Creatures of the Night Tour. The band was not doing really well in America or Europe, and then they go to South America, and then they played like stadiums like for 100,000 people every night. They play like 3 different towns. I think they played 2 nights in Sao Paulo or in Rio. I don't remember. And then I think those were actually the last shows they ever played with the makeup, with Vinnie Vincent. And then that was the thing, man. And then after that, like, then
did you go to this concert in São Paulo?
Was that?
Did you go to the concert in São Paulo, or were you too?
I was 8, but that was the first argument I probably had with my parents. Like, I want to go see Kiss, and I'm like,
right.
Oh, people are gonna be smoking joints there, and they're gonna be drunk, and there's gonna be fights, and the police is gonna beat everybody. I'm like, oh no, I like that, even though I'm only 8, I had no idea what you're talking about. But no, I did not go. It's probably the main frustration of my life. but I ended up seeing Kiss multiple times, obviously after that. But then that's when it opened, because then like Kiss played the shows, and then I bought Creatures of the Night on vinyl and Destroyer, and I'm like, dude, this is what I want for my life. I mean, all my friends wanted to be like you used to ask kids back in the day, and like, what do you want to be? like? And I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a cop, I want to be a dentist, a Jedi. But I wanted to be Gene Simmons, I thought it was kind of like a job, like, one of those Gene Simmons kind of guys, and then but that thing opened, like then I started finding out that there were TV shows that were showing videos, like heavy metal bands videos, and that's when I learned about Iron Maiden, which was the second thing. And then I bought I bought Power Slave when it came out. I was 9 or 10 years old, man, and but all because of the videos. And I first saw the Run to the Hills video was the first thing I saw, and then I like started buying stuff by Accept and Queen, and then Van Halen, all those Black Sabbath, and then Ozzy. I got Bark of the Moon, and then Ultimate Sin. And then I never turned back.
When did you first attend a concert? Do you remember what was the very first heavy metal or rock concert that you attended?
I saw like in the late '80s. I saw like a bunch of the bands that were playing. I saw like funny enough, one of the first shows I ever saw was Public Image Limited with Johnny Rotten from Sex Pistols.
Wow.
Yeah, like they're a very artsy band. They're like, but I already loved the Sex Pistols, so I went to PIL. I saw Oingo Boingo, which was like I've always been into a lot of different kinds of rock.
Were you at all like involved in the sense that understanding and knowing what was happening on the underground rock and heavy scene in São Paulo during the late 80s? Because obviously at the time there was the young André Matos and Viper.
All my friends who lived around the block, because like back in the day, kids like you used to hang out with your school friends, but you also like playing out in the street. So you meet the kids who live like 2 blocks down, 2 blocks up, because everybody used to be playing on the streets all the time. So I used to hang out with a lot of kids who were like a few years older than I am, and these guys are still friends of mine to this day. And all of them were into heavy metal. They were all huge Iron Maiden fans. And let's say like 1988, they were starting an Iron Maiden tribute band. And they were like, I'd say around like 17, 18. They could play bars already. So that's when I started actually getting like finding out about tribute bands and smaller bands. I actually saw Sepultura on the Beneath the Remains tour in Sao Paulo as well. I think that was probably one of the first heavy metal shows I've ever been to. But then I started going to like clubs and then seeing bands like. But like back in the day, I was never really. I liked Sepultura, because they were like the new thing that was coming around, and Viper. Viper is the pre-Angra band thing, if you want to put it that way. There was a very like Halloween Iron Maiden influenced band in Brazil, and since those bands were really big down there, then we had our own band, and then Viper, like they were from the same neighborhood as I was, so I knew friends who were like, oh, I'm in school with André Matos. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh, wow.
And I was like 13 and André was probably 17 or 18 back in the day. I'm like, oh my God. So for me, André Matos and Bruce Dickinson were like on the same level of musicianship and popularity, like when you're a kid, you just go like, oh yeah, those guys are in the magazine. So they're on the same level,
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that was pretty fun.
How was the negotiation at home for you to start going to those places? Because I can imagine that as a teenager, and I mean, I can only relate to my personal experience, but it was always kind of like a little bit complicated when you're like 12, 13, 14, 15, and you're showing up at home with all of those crazy magazines with, monsters and blood in it, and then there's this loud music coming out of your bedroom, and then one day you come to the lunch table and tell your parents that you're gonna go and see this band tonight. I mean, how do you remember? Do you recollect any memories from at a given time that you actually went to your mom and to your dad and said, hey, tonight I'm going to go and see this band, and it was a heavy band, and what was the reaction that they had?
That's a very good question. It's funny because again, like as all of my friends, they lived around the block, so our parents knew each other, so it was always like, oh, I'm going out with the with like, I mean, the Smiths kid or, whoever, like, and they're like, oh yeah, we know their parents. So they were a little concerned. They wouldn't mind me going to concerts because, there was a lot of kids in my school as well. So like we would go like, oh, there's like 10, 15 kids going to shows. And, which is like a good to reinforce that back in the day, there was no issues with like minors going to concerts. I mean, in the early 90s in Sao Paulo, I remember because I was, when I was already like 18 or 19, I remember having friends who were 15. They could not go to concerts, and it was super frustrating. But there was a law that they started like in the early 90s. But then in the late 80s, there was like, you just show up. You just need a ticket to go to concerts, So my parents, like, when it came to going to concerts at like real concerts in venues, like more popular stuff, they wouldn't mind. Like I saw David Bowie in a stadium, like in at the Palmeiras Stadium in Sao Paulo. It was like no issues. And it was like they were a little concerned, but nothing really serious. But then they started getting a little concerned when I started going to clubs. Then they're like, oh, 'cause clubs, that's where people drink, where there's drugs. But I just wanted to go see bands. And one of my neighbors, like he had the first Iron Maiden tribute band, and they started playing at this bar called Blackjack Bar. That was around when Iron Maiden put out Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, and they were playing Moonchild and the Evil That Men Do. Those were the new songs back in the day. And then he even let me in for free, because if you're a musician, that's how I started like getting like quote unquote involved with any kind of production. I used to get in the bar as his plus one, which was like his guitar tech, But if it was, my idea was like, oh, the roadie is just a guy who actually carries the instruments or equipment in and out of the venue, like, and, I was basically like a car loader, calling myself, oh no, I'm a roadie, but then my parents were a little concerned, because like by that time I was like growing my hair, and but then at the same time they were like, you've liked this shit since you were a kid. It's not like a phase, because like when you're 8, you wanted to be Gene Simmons. It's natural that now you're 15. You weren't like it's just a natural thing,
Yeah.
But my dad had a lot of concerns, because he was like, like, what are you gonna do with your life? Basically, literally, like that "I Want to Rock" video from Twisted Sister, that the parents are like in the living room having like all the family, kind of perfect all American family, having breakfast or lunch, and they're like, what do you want to do with your life? And the kid goes, "I want to rock."
Yeah.
It was kind of like that, But then, like many years later, like my dad was super proud of what I ended up doing. And,
yeah, that brings the question, actually. I mean, when you're growing up as a teenager in a house and on the pre-college period, on when you obviously, kind of having to make a decision on what kind of professional path you're going to endure in life, and coming from to a certain extent, very conservative family, with your dad being an attorney and your mom a psychologist. I mean, what was the inclination that they saw in you, perhaps, in terms of, okay, what will André do with his professional life as soon as he finishes high school? And what did you have in mind? Did you end up going to university at the time, or what was your path after high school, basically?
Yeah, so I think that, like, and this applies to this day. I think if you don't have any passion that's like that requires really a very specific study, like being studying laws, or being like in a healthcare business, or being a doctor or an engineer or anything like that, it requires actually deep studies. Like it's kind of hard, because, and then I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And then I just went with the flow, and I went to college. I studied business, because that's what you're gonna do. So like on my first year of studying business, and my first job, actually, funny enough, when I was 17 or 18, I'm like, oh, I need a job, because like, again, my parents always loved traveling, and so by the time I was 15, I had been all over the place. We would, like, every 6 months would come either to the States or to Europe. So I was always traveling. I ended up well, I ended up going to summer school in England when I was 16. So I lived there for like a couple of months with a host family. And that was like a lot of fun. And I bought so many records. Oh my God. And that's 1991. Yeah. And so, like, and then like coming back from England, like spending that period of time there, and then by that time I needed to make a decision in graduating high school, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go study business. So my first year of college, like when you're studying business, like all the kids are into business, and they want to be business people, and they want to like find an intern job in a multinational company, get like a company car, suit up, go to meetings, and do whatever business it is, like very traditional kind of like working class people in an executive area. And I'm like, okay, that's probably what I'm going to do. I had my hair down on my hips back then, and so I'm like, I'm like, following, trying to, I'm going to get an intern job. And again, my first job, like I get sidetracked sometimes. My first job was as an English teacher when I was actually after I turned 18. I went to, I'm like, I need a job, like keep on traveling. My parents can keep paying for all my traveling costs. I was still living with them. And so I'm like, what can I do? And I'm like, I can teach English because I've been fluent in English, everything ever since I was 10, basically, so I went to
and how did that happen? Did you go to private tutoring school?
I went to a private British school, like ever since I was 6.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I basically learned how to read and write in English simultaneously as I was learning in Portuguese as well.
That's one of the things that we sometimes oversee when we're young, but it's such a gift that parents give to us, right? Because that's something that you did not choose probably, but your parents just basically did for you,
Yeah, basically, yeah. And I don't remember like me having to learn English. It was just like happening naturally because I was simultaneously learning both languages at the same time.
Incredible.
Which was really cool. It made me, but it made it a little. If anything, it just made it a little harder Portuguese, because Portuguese is a very hard language, man. It's very complicated. It's full of rules. It's really hard for you to speak properly. And English is super easy.
Mm-hmm.
There's only like half a dozen of rules, grammar rules, and then there you go.
Yeah.
And so like I was teaching English and going to teaching English during the day at the at an American institute for foreigners. So I teach English for Brazilians, and during the day, and then attending college at night. And then I started like looking for a job, and back then I was already writing for Roadie Crew magazine. I was like writing out music articles, and then getting to know people from the music industry. And there was like a couple of radio stations that they would bring rock stars to do interviews, and the host did not speak English. So I don't know if you remember that show from São Paulo called Backstage. With Vitão. So like basically I started like going and doing translation for like, so I did like, dude, I have so many freaking bands and artists. Man, I did like Dio, Deep Purple, Manowar, you name it, man, Slayer, and we're talking about like 1997, I think. And then I was getting like exposed into like writing articles for the music magazine, doing the translations for radio stations. And then I started being booked as a translator for promo tours. So I did like Dimmu Borgir, Primal Fear, Halloween. That's when I became really close to the Halloween guys. Ended up working multiple times with the band, and I'm still very good friends with them. By the way, their new album is really good. And, and that's how it started, and I never left the passion of like enjoying production, like stage production and logistics. That's what when I was studying business, I remember we had there was a class about logistics. That's what I loved the most,
How many years was the degree, the business degree?
I ended up quitting in 2000, and I'm going to explain why. It was 5 years. That was like such a long time. So I quit the 4th year. So I then ended up not graduating because I was so sick of it. By that time, I knew what I wanted to do already. I wanted to go towards tour production, and
Just one quick question, André, before you proceed. You've mentioned that you had so many friends, musician friends, and cover bands, and doing all sorts of things back in the day. Were you ever inclined in becoming a musician yourself? Have you ever tried playing an instrument? Have you learned anything? Have you been a musician in the band at any given time?
Funny enough, I again, as you said, like all my friends, they influenced me a lot. So I think around 1992, when I was like 17, 18, I bought a bass guitar. Actually, my mom even came to me with me to the music store, and we bought a Peavey which was kind of like a copy of a Fender P bass, which was obviously my favorite bass because of Steve Harris. And so I started playing. I still play sometimes, but I was only in a band in a like very brief period of time with a couple of friends. We never played any shows. We were just rehearsing, and they were like huge Poison fans. So we were playing like covers by Poison, which is by far not my favorite band, but you know. And then like I've always loved the Ramones, man. The Ramones were always like one of my favorite bands ever. I still collect Ramones records and all that stuff. And so like my thing was always, and I still do sometimes. Well, I haven't done it in a while, but like sit down and play along with Ramones songs. You know, like I still have like about 5 or 6 bass guitars. You know, they're all hanging on the wall right now. Or some were gifted to me. You know, but I never thought about being a musician. I've always like ever since I was a kid, like going to concerts, I was looking at the side wing, going like, oh, what's happening there? And going looking at front of house, oh, who's the light guy? Who's the sound guy? You know, like that always arose me. Like and trucks and packing trucks. And how are you going to strike all the stuff and you're going to play next town tomorrow? How are you going to do that? You know, that always intrigued me. Yeah. You know, and that's, you know, like when
so yeah, I asked you about if you try to be a musician before, you know, getting into the music business, because sometimes, you know, a lot of people they do not succeed in terms of playing an instrument or forming a band and making that happen, and eventually they become part of the crew. You know, like you mentioned, that you become a roadie, you do some sort of backstage function in order to stay in touch with that world. But that wasn't the case with you. So and when I actually sidetracked here, you were just about to explain, to tell what happened at the time that you were in the 4th year of your degree and you end up quitting. So yeah, if you could just tell us what happened. Why did you quit on the 4th year? It's just like, you know, a year to go, and then boom, that's it, no more.
It's funny. I agree with what you said, but I disagree with just one term. Like I always say as well, like there's a lot of crew guys who are kind of like frustrated musicians, or they could not succeed as musicians, so they end up being crew. But I think the chances of you succeeding as a musician are way smaller than you succeeding as a crew guy. If you're a crew guy, let's say if you're a musician, you're a guitar player, you have a band, and then you have to be really creative and you have to be really good at your music, and then you have to be lucky enough to be at the right place and know the right people so they can make your band happen or your music happen and become big. You know, and if people don't like it, then you're screwed, because it's kind of like a once in a lifetime kind of shot. But if you're a crew guy and you can do sound, you can do sound for Megadeth one day, and then the tour ends, and then you can just go ahead and do sound for, I don't know, whoever, Cardi B.
Oh no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I think I expressed myself in the best way.
Like, it's something that it's a term that I use as well, and everybody does. I just wanted to reinforce it. I just wanted to reinforce. It's just harder as a musician.
Sure.
It's way harder. Way harder, man.
No, I agree. I just think that if you're a guitar tech or a drum tech, or you know, you probably, in order for you to become someone recognized within the business, you need to play. You need to know the instrument. You know, the ins and outs of the instrument. You got to play the instrument really, really well in order to be able to be next to someone that is a professional, that is a touring musician. And most of the people that, you know so well an instrument, they at some point they played in a band. They did have that kind of dream, you know, of like becoming the star themselves. And then sometimes, you know, things just take on a different course, and the opportunity emerges for you to go and help someone and eventually make a career out of it. Obviously, that when it's different areas, one of them, which we'll talk in a minute, which is your case, a production manager, tour manager, which is like the highest rank within any crew in the touring business. You know, that's another matter. You don't need to be a frustrated musician to become that at all.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, but it's funny as well. Like I've toured. Like I'm obviously not going to drop any names, but I toured with a bunch of crew guys who kind of were first-rated musicians, and I've seen people getting jealous of the actual musicians we were working with. Because like when you're like on a tour bus or in a hotel or you're hanging out with a band, I always kind of like have this. It's not like it's a sense of respect, like. They are the musicians, they are the stars. We're here to make them the stars, So like, let their egos inflate, but we can't have egos, Like our egos are the last thing. Crew guys' egos, like star tags and rock star tags, Like you don't want to have anything to do with that. Although it happens a lot, but like you've seen like. I've seen a lot of musicians like trying to push out, like going into musicians and going like, hey, like every night on the bus, hey, this is my band. Oh, this is the thing that I recorded. And I'm like, dude, nobody's actually interested. You're here to do a job. Like not to,
Yeah.
But that happens a lot. But this is just my perspective, anyways.
No, but
like,
I agree. There is a very thin line that it's very difficult, and some people even joke about it, don't they? Saying that sometimes crew members, they actually behave in a way more rock star way than the musicians themselves. So
yeah, absolutely,
it can happen. Absolutely, it can happen.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I wanna definitely now, because I can see that this conversation like. Just broadening it up very quickly, I want to get into that point where you dropped out from college and you were already you were already doing the jobs that you just described to us, that you were working with rock shows and doing interviews and being the translator and helping them out, and with a lot of experience traveling the world and being fluent in English and all of those things, which a lot of it basically is just like the old saying that preparation meeting opportunity. You were prepared, and whenever those opportunities came your way, you embraced them, and those basically, I imagine, they gave you a very good basis for the next stage of your life, which I believe after all that was getting into becoming you became a promoter rep eventually before you became a tour manager. Is that correct?
Yeah. Because as a promoter rep, basically my job was you were basically the tour manager from the promoter side. You were assisting the band in a certain territory, and then you were doing the tour manager side, but the tour management and production manager aspects of the entire tour, but from the promoter's side. So like you would get everything together, so you get everything ready for the actual band's tour manager and production manager to discuss with you like changes and improvements that you can do. And it's a really hard job because you're stuck in between the promoter, budget, financial aspects, which is the main important thing in a tour, and the artist's requests, So you're basically a mediator of everything. You get shot from everybody, like it's like anything that goes wrong, it's your fault from both promoter side and then artist side. So I'm not really a good fan of doing that. I have like the most respect for promoter reps, even though I know I gave a lot of them a hard time all over the world being on the band side. But it's really one of the toughest jobs in the business. So that kind of made me question my decision at one point, because I'm like, I don't want to be shot from everybody, like you're working your ass off and then something goes wrong and then all of a sudden everything is your fault.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really crazy job, especially if you're working, if the expectations of the artist are not the same expectations budget wise from the promoter side. That's really, when money starts becoming an issue, then everything may go downhill like really fast. So I didn't really like that part of the business, but I learned a lot by doing that. But anyway, to answer your actual question, I'm sorry, I got sidetracked a lot.
No problem, man.
And around like 1998, like, and again, I was always traveling to go to festivals and concerts, and it was fun because by that time I was like meeting those people I was working with doing translations in Brazil or like doing any kind of tour assistance. And then I would get in touch with them, like the Halloween guys became really close. So whenever I was at a festival, they would hook me up with backstage access. But like whenever people, like most of people would go backstage to hang out and party and get free beer and hang out with artists, I was always hanging out on stage at the docks and checking out how the truck's logistics would work, what the stage manager was doing, like hanging out with the crew. I've always been more of a crew guy than an artist kind of guy. Even like days off, all the stuff, I would always hang out with the crew, even though like I had great friendship with a lot of the musicians I worked with. I'm always more of a crew kind of guy, leave the artist alone, let them do their boring artist thing, like I'll hang out with the crew, like this has always been me, so around 1998, like we were in Europe, and I got, for whatever reason, I was backstage, like not even backstage. We were at an Iron Maiden show in Belgium. And back in the day, Iron Maiden weren't that big. 1998, they were playing the same venues that Sepultura was playing, but they were not selling out, and Sepultura was. So I was like hanging by the Iron Maiden bus, talking to Steve Harris, and I told him I'd been to a few shows, and he was like, "Okay, cool. It's like, who are you here with?" I'm like, "With my brother," and he was like, "Oh, here's a couple of backstage passes for you guys. So with these passes, you can go to every show." I'm like, "Okay, thank you," and then by then, like, he wasn't even my friend or anything. So I took that chance. Like, we saw like a few more shows. I took that chance to start learning more about what Iron Maiden were doing, and then I became really good friends with their security guy, Wally, who passed out like a few years ago. And Wally, for whatever reason, he liked me a lot because like whenever he needed something, he would come to me and go like, "Hey, can you go get this? Can you help me out this with that? Like, can you go to the buzz with me?" I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." And then I was already in college. And then at the end of that year, Bruce Dickinson came back to the band. And I'm like, "Man, I think I'm going to go to the U.S. tour and see what happens, By the way, I was very good friends with Steve Lazarus as well, who I had met during the Fear of the Dark tour. Steve Lazarus, his sister used to be married to Steve Harris. She's Lorraine. She's a mom of the girls who you know very well.
Yeah.
And so Steve used to run the fan club and do live video for Maiden. So we were really good friends. So whenever I jumped on a Maiden tour as a fan, I would end up getting all access passes. They would let me hang out, because they were just like, "Okay, can you go to the merch truck and do this and do that?" So it was basically like a runner kid, So by being invisible and not bothering anybody in the band and actually helping out the crew, they would just let me hang out, And
you learned very early. You learned very early how to be efficient and be kind of invisible, which is a lot of what the job requires, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it was just like they would go like, "Oh, let's like help me out like with Nichols golf clubs, help me out with this. Oh, we need to get like 15 merch boxes that are in the truck, and we're in Dallas, Texas in the summer, and it's like 150 degrees. Can you go inside a truck?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, I'll do it." And then at the end of the day, they would just give me a meal ticket so I could like have dinner at the crew catering and stuff like that. But actually being able to be around all that stuff. So that's when I learned a lot. And then it was 1999, and then they announced the Brave New World tour the next year, which would be kind of like a coincidence with our winter break in Brazil. But I wouldn't miss like a whole month of classes by going to Europe and following that tour. But then I'm like, "Oh, I'm just gonna go to the first show and see like if all the crew guys are still there. If they're gonna give me a pass, and then if I can be around and learn, then I'll just I'm not coming back to Brazil. Not gonna go attend to the rest of the year of school." So I got there. The first show was in France.
Just one quick question, André. How was this negotiation with your parents like? Because
my parents were pissed. My parents were pissed because like they were
Because
like,
at this
oh, you're just,
point,
like,
you're about to, like, I mean, you're heading towards the end of your degree, which for
yeah.
any supportive parent, regardless of how supportive they were with you, I mean, they all want us to get a bloody degree, don't they?
Oh, if my kid does that, I'll freaking kick him out of the house. And I have a 6.5-month-old baby, and he's sitting like right next to me, and he's actually looking at me when I said that, you know. But you know, but by then I knew that I was not gonna I did not want to have anything to do with the corporate world, like business and suiting up, like
okay.
You know,
I don't want to miss that bit when you left in Brazil. You made the decision, and then you went for the beginning of that particular tour here. So carry on with that part of the story that I believe it's quite interesting.
Yeah, so like we got there, and the first Maiden show on a Brave New World tour was a festival in France, and dude, like the minute Wally saw me and was like, "Oh, you're here. You coming to more shows?" I'm like, "I'm gonna be here for maybe a month, you know, coming to like a lot of shows." And he was like, "Okay, here's a pass." So he gave me like, back in the day, Maiden had those laminate passes with a photo with your photo and your name in it. That meant like that's the same level of pass that the band members had, you know. So like, he instantly gave me one of those. I'm like, okay, cool. So that means I'm going to be hanging out a lot here. So again, same thing. But on the Brave New World tour was a little different. You know, the band was already getting bigger again, and Wally wasn't really requesting me for a lot because he had like multiple assistants. But they let me hang out. You know, which was fun enough, which was good enough.
You find yourself.
That's great. That's really, really. Again, you having the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to just meet people and create your own opportunities within, you know, this world in a genuine way. Like you said, you made so many good friends, and people probably, like most people, would be seeing those opportunities as just, you know, opportunities to hang around the band and try and get pictures and sign goodies and stuff like that. But you were actually really like learning the ins and outs of what's involved in such a big operation of, you know, bringing the show to city after city and country after country. So that's really cool. I mean, I didn't know you were doing all of that. I knew that you were traveling and seeing all of those concerts, but I didn't know you were actually, you know, hands on, like really creating your own luck, basically.
Yeah, and there were people like Wally Grove. He was the head of security of Maiden, and I mean, he was with Maiden since I don't know, like Somewhere in Time tour, and he worked with them until he was getting really sick because he was like a big guy, smoked a lot, and then he got replaced with that Swedish guy later on in the early, I think it was like around Dance of Death, after Dance of Death, and but he was the guy with the passes. You know, like sometimes I would just sit on his production office and we would make all the laminates for the night. You know, for like put like backstage passes in the envelopes for photographers. You know, I would help him with doing all that stuff, and he would just go like, just keep it low. You know, so I followed his advice, and I always think of him like, keep it low. So whenever like the band members arrive at the venue or anything, I would just go the other side. You know, It's like I don't want to be seen. You know, like sometimes I go like say hello. You know, but I barely took pictures with them, you know. Like I think I have two photos with Steve Harris, and then like maybe 2 photos with Bruce Dickinson. And then with Bruce, I ended up doing more stuff, like during the Chemical Wedding tour. His tour manager and his manager back in the day, Steve McTee, who's currently the manager of Dragon Force. You know, like
he's not anymore.
Like, what?
He's not anymore. Yeah.
Not anymore? I wonder why. But,
that's another story.
Steve McTee was a good friend of mine, and Dave Pattenden. Dave Pattenden was the project manager for Iron Maiden, and he used to like every single release that Maiden put out, it had Dave Pattenden's hands on it. And Dave Pattenden is a good friend of mine to this day, and he actually moved to Canada. And you know Sam Dunn, who does all the video documentaries.
Yeah.
He is Sam Dunn's assistant.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so he's
Such
doing.
Small world.
Yeah, when we did Wacken with Arch Enemy in 2016, he he was there, like, because Sam Dunn was covering it, and so like all these old people from Sanctuary, like, they ended up being very good friends to this day.
Amazing.
Anyways,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
So and that was it. And then, like, I hung out on the Brave New World tour for like basically the first month of the tour, and then came back to Brazil. And then I started getting like offers for going, like, hey, you want to tour manage like this band from a local promoter. So I did, like, with a band called Tristania from Norway. So I did the tour manager and production manager for their South American tour. And then I started getting like more and more invitations or offers to do that kind of stuff. Then I, like, Paulo Baron started like doing his tours and festivals, and so I did stuff like Primal Fear, I think I did Halloween, and I did Scorpions. The Scorpions were like, like, it was crazy because I was put in a situation where I was assistant production manager and assistant tour manager for the band, but I was also I was mainly the production manager for Paulo and Top Link Music, and that was a nightmare because I didn't know 100% what I was doing, and I was required to do the job of 3 different people, and that was a nightmare, literally. Like, I remember, like, going to a hotel room in Mexico and literally crying, going like, what the hell am I doing wrong? But I was super naive at that point, going like, little did I know that the job that I was doing was actually supposed to be done by 3 different people, and but that's when you learn,
That's 2005, isn't it? That was the Live and Louder festival, isn't it? I remember that because I was actually, at the time, I was a musician myself, and I was coming back from a couple of shows with Angra in Curitiba or somewhere, and I got to Porto Alegre, and that was the night of Live and Louder in Porto Alegre, and Scorpions was the headliner. And I remember talking to you, and you said, listen, I'm at the venue, I can't make it back to the hotel, and I can't remember exactly what you needed, but you authorized via phone the receptionist to allow me into your room. So I went into your room, I picked up something that you needed, and then when I arrived at the venue, you got me an all access pass from Scorpions.
I remember that. Yeah.
We saw each other very briefly because you were like super busy.
I know. It's funny, like every time I see you, like, I'm always super busy. I was just telling my wife the other day that, like, dude, I think the last time I saw him, I was backstage in London, and you brought me a cheeseburger.
Yeah, so
it's
true.
The afternoon.
Yes, very, very true. Well, to be honest, from all of the times that we end up seeing each other throughout those years, that day you were like, I don't know why, but you had a bit more time. And for someone like, with the kind of responsibility that you have on the road, to have that kind of spare time, it's really rare, especially when you do in London. It's normally like the highlight of any European tour.
Yeah, but that's because on that tour we were doing Arch Enemy and Creator. So I had a very good work ethics with Creator's tour manager, Bazi, and so we were splitting out a responsibility between both bands. Mm-hmm. We were like, okay, let's imagine like we're both taking care of both bands. And and we had been doing it for 3 months already, because we did the U.S., we did Japan, and then we did the U.S., and then we were like, Europe was towards the end, so things were kind of like flowing by itself, but it was crazy, yeah.
So, André, so then after, I remember that it was at the very, not the very same time, but right after you did the Scorpions in South America, that was the time, I think 2005, 2006, that you basically got the gig with Angra. Is that correct?
Yeah, the thing with Angra is that because I was doing a lot of stage management and a production manager for shows, and then I did that. Remember the Tribuzzi gig that I did in Sao Paulo? So, like, basically for the listeners, it was this kid with a lot of money that he recorded an album, and he had guests like on the level of Bruce Dickinson. He like paying Bruce Dickinson just singing his record, and paying him to fly down to Brazil and play a couple of songs in his concert. And we had Chris Dale from Bruce Dickinson band. We had Bruce Dickinson. We had Roland Grapper from Halloween. We had Roy Z. We had a bunch of people. It was a crazy concert. So I was the production manager of that concert, and we did 2 shows in São Paulo, one in Belo Horizonte, and after that,
that one might have been a very good learning curve for you, right? Dealing with so many different stars in a very short period of time, and having to like organize and liaise with the artist, which on this particular case the main artist was Renato himself, and then having to organize when this guy jumps on stage, when that one comes out, which mic does he use, and all of that, and all of those changes, and the show's being recorded live as well. So I mean, lots of equipment
involved for this show, so I had to be the stage manager as well. And I found out like on the day, you know, like, oh, there's no stage manager. I'm like, am I being the stage manager as well? And they're like, oh, apparently, yeah. So that was basically me doing everything, and there was no guitar tech for the guys. And Kiko had brought his guitar tech, Rodrigo, who's now with Machine Head. So Rodrigo ended up like helping Chris Dale out and Roland Grappa out, like, and that's how I became like extremely good friends with Rodrigo. And Kiko from who was back in the day, he was in Angra, but he's in Megadeth now. And then Kiko approached me and was like, I didn't know you knew how to do that stuff. I'm like, I don't, but I do.
And, I'm learning at the best possible school. I'm learning by doing it.
I'm learning on the floor, man. Which I think the best way of learning this kind of job. You know, you can't just go to college.
I was just going to say, thinking like specifically about this particular show we are talking about now. I mean, where else in the world could anybody teach you to do all of those things? Because we could literally right now, you could literally just sit right now and use this particular concert to explain every single like moment of that day and everything that involved on the days prior, and that's gonna take hours for you to explain all that.
And people are still going to tell you, oh, but this is not supposed to be like that. I said, yeah, I know, but that's how it is. You know? Yeah, and then a couple weeks later, I got a phone call, I think, from God damn it, Toninho, a former Angra's manager. And he was like, hey, because by that time I wasn't writing for the magazine anymore. And then, like, because, you know, like, like Tony, this guy, he used to manage Angra, but he had a magazine as well. It was kind of like the competitor of the magazine that it was a rival magazine of the ones that I used to write for. And he was like, hey, you want to come over and write for us? I'm like, well, yeah, why not? I'm not doing anything anyways, you know. And so I stop at their office, and they go like, yeah, we also need a tour manager for Angra. I said, I knew they were going to ask me that, you know. Wow. And I'm like, okay, so when do I start? And they were like, are you available next weekend? You know, I'm like, okay, because they were, it was like on the Temple of Shadows tour, so they were doing like a bunch of weekend shows in Brazil, because, you know, like in Brazil, like those bands, they have like, since Brazil is a huge country, you know, they do like weekend shows, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you know, so you're off, like you go back home during the week, and then Friday you take off, do 3 shows back to back, and come back. So we were doing that every week. You know, and it started working out. And then next thing I know is that I'm on a plane flying to Japan with Angra and Blind Guardian. That's the first time I went to Japan. And then we did Europe after that, you know, and that was, you know. But, you know, the band was like, by that time, it was like, I think 2006. There was like a lot of internal fights. You know, it's not the easiest band to work with, you know, because the manager put them in a kind of a bubble, you know, so there was like a lot of people with a lot of different say in the band. You know, they couldn't see eye to eye with anything, you know, so the band was kind of falling apart. Yeah. You know, and so it was really, really hard. Like the day before we flew to Japan, there was like a major fight, and I don't mean an argument, I mean a fight, like a fist fight backstage. You know, the day before we were flying to Japan, I'm like, okay, so there's this band fist fighting backstage the night before we jump on a 55-day tour. You
And
know, right?
what was your say on this particular case? I imagine this was the very first, like you said, the very first time you traveled to Japan, and then you're doing an European tour as well. So in many ways, this was the very first time as a tour manager and perhaps even the production manager, that you are in charge of the ship and you are taking this boat throughout the world. And then you see yourself in a situation where you just described, where you're getting fist fights backstage, and things are getting really ugly amongst themselves, the musicians. So you, on that particular position, at the time, did you actually, because we know those things differ a lot, but one of the things that two managers normally have in common is that they are the closest to the artist than anybody else on the road. They look after the artist on the road. So did you have back then a relationship of which you could somehow intervene on those particular situations and somehow talk to people and try and make amends, or were you just watching from the outside? And basically, I mean, what was your gut instinct, because you're kind of like leading this group of people, you know, and then all those chaotic scenarios are just taking place in front of you. And again, it's kind of like, you know, the first time that you're actually traveling with the same group of people, with the same artists, to so many different continents and countries in the world. So what was your approach back then? And I'd love to know how, if that has changed throughout the years for you, if you would have acted in a different way perhaps, or if not.
In that particular situation, it's a great question actually, and I've never thought about it actually. But like, I followed my guts in a sense that, like, I remember what Molly Grove told me, like, keep it low. So in that situation, basically we had the crew, which was like, everybody in the crew was very good friends. I'm still very good friends with almost everybody from that period of time. And we had the band on the other side. So the band was basically split in two, to a point where we were traveling in a double-decker in Europe. So if a certain band member came down on the bus, the other band members would go up, you know. So and there was a lot of provocation, you know. It's like people were just like taunting each other, like, you know, just basically like kindergarten kids. And so I'm just, whatever anyone did to interfere would just make matters worse. So I was like, I'm just gonna let them do whatever they want. If they want to kill each other, you know, just my main concern is that if you kill each other, I'm probably going to have to organize your funeral, and that will suck, you know? So, but I at one point, I'm like, you know what, just do your thing, you know? I just let it happen, you know? So I was just basically counting down the days, you know, because we did Anger and Blind Garden in Japan for about 3 weeks. It was like we played everywhere. It was a great tour. And then we flew from Japan to Frankfurt, and we started like a European tour of another 40 days. We because Angra was really huge in France and Spain, so we were playing like shows like all over. We did like a couple of German shows as well, Belgium, Netherlands, and all that crap. And but you know, things were. It was like the vibe. The concerts were great, but the vibe on the tour bus was really, really bad, like really bad. So we came back. We flew back to Brazil, and after like everybody took 2 weeks off, and then they had another show. Like one of those, I think it was Goiânia in Brazil. So we flew there, and one of the band members was like, I'm fucking gonna quit. I'm tired of this shit, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I was so drained with all this psychological matter. I'm like, I don't need to be a part of this shit. So when I flew back from those shows, I called manager. I'm like, I don't want to be doing this anymore. And so for 1 month, I was sitting at home, like not knowing what I was gonna do. My kid just barfed all over my wife.
He is entitled.
So I went back home, and I'm like, what am I going to do now? And then I got a call from Monica Cavalera, Igor Cavalera's ex-wife. I'm like, so I heard you left Angra. You want to join Sepultura? And the Sepultura guys have been like great friends of mine. And with Sepultura, that's another thing that I used to do. Since I've known Andreas forever, Andreas, Igor, and Paolo, and Derek. I've known them forever. And then like back in the early 2000s, they would also let me hang out with them because their tour manager Eddie who's still a great friend of mine, Eddie. He ended up like touring with Ghost. After he left Sepultura, he toured with Motorhead for like 15 years until the day Lemmy died, and then he did System of a Down and then Ghost. And last time he was here in Las Vegas with Baby Metal, he's still in the business. And so Eddie was like their tour manager, great friend of mine. So like with Sepultura, the same thing. I had all access, and I was always like hanging out and doing like stupid backstage stuff, helping out. And so I knew how the band worked. So I joined Sepultura and stayed there for, I don't know, 10 years, I don't know.
Cool. So this was part one of the conversation, and on part two, André will dive into his years touring of Sepultura, Arch Enemy, and a lot more. Stay tuned and keep checking the Instagram account at rollercoastercarl. And yeah, I'll see you soon.